We've been covering the Postal Service a lot on this program. We've been covering what I consider the war on the Postal Service for a long time on this program. And that war just entered a new phase that I and you, that I find deeply troubling and that I believe you should too. And here to talk about that with us is Mark Dimondstein. Mark is the president of the American Postal Workers Union. So he is in the middle of this fray. And without any further ado, I'm going to welcome him to the program. So Mark, welcome to the Zero Hour.
Thank you for having me, Richard. Pleasure to be here.
Well, and we appreciate you joining us. Now, my first question for you is, in my introduction, I said that first of all, let's start at the very beginning. I characterize what is going on right now in the past months as a war on the Postal Service. Is that overly hyperbolic on my part?
No, you were absolutely right. I mean, it didn't start with this administration. There's been an effort over the years to at least partially privatize, sell off to corporation pieces of the post office. But with the advent of the Trump administration, this war has gotten hotter. It certainly has accelerated. And the good listeners out there don't have to listen to Mark Dimondstein. The Trump administration, through White House Office of Management Budget Report in June 2018, put into writing that they plan to privatize, i.e. sell the public post office to private corporations. Of course, what that would do to the people of the country is we would lose the public commons, we would lose a small d democratic right, we would lose this universal service mandate, which dictates, rightfully so, that we have equal access, no matter who we are, where we live, 160 million addresses, to our postal services at a uniform and reasonable rate. So that war is definitely on. And then in December 2018, there was a presidential postal task force that didn't call for open privatization, but called for a lot of things that would set the post office up for privatization, such as reduced service, higher prices, an end to collective bargaining rights of workers, and so on. And then so that war is on, and you were absolutely right. Now, what's happened with the COVID pandemic is we entered a dire economic crisis within the Postal Service itself. We obviously have a health and safety crisis throughout the country and world, an economic crisis. Both have deeply affected the post office. Postal workers are out there in the front lines in very difficult and dangerous times, serving the public and doing the best we can. We've done a lot as the unions to try to ensure that people are working in the safest possible way. But the economic impact is actually putting the Postal Service into a tailspin. As most of your listeners know, there's no tax dollars that goes into the post office. The revenue, it runs off postage rates and postal products, and that makes the Postal Service go around. And there's going to be close to a 50% drop in revenue as mail has fallen off the cliff. And the post office is literally sometime the end of summer, early fall, likely going to run out of money. And you take that scenario further, if you run out of money, then we can't carry out our mission. So we are and that dire situation has accelerated those who are waging war on the public postal service. They actually are using this crisis as an opportunity to carry out their sinister plans.
So let me ask you, just as a broader question, and you let me know how, whether you think it's something we should go into. But I've often wondered, why does the Postal Service have to be self-sufficient financially? In other words, this has been Trump's big complaint. It's been the big argument for privatization. But, there are a lot of people out there. You mentioned equal access, that everybody should have equal access to it. Should we maybe, as a country, reconsider the notion that it has to be fully self-funded? It's a public service like other public services. Does it have to be that way, in your opinion?
Well, of course, nothing set in stone. That came out of the 1970 Postal Reorganization Act. It's worked up to a certain point, but in this dire financial crisis, it's actually not working. So the question that you raised is a question before the American people now and before Congress. And that is, the post office needs financial relief, and that financial relief needs to come in the form of whatever we want to call them, stimulus packages, incentives, and so that does raise the question that the taxpayers need to and should put in some money now to make sure that the post office survives this COVID crisis and can then carry on either going back to the normal way or if there's a new way that has to be done based on this. But the question you raise is always a debate about the public good and how that is and how that is funded. So I don't want to go too much into that debate, except in this moment, you are absolutely right. We do need the Congress through taxpayer funds, at least in terms of COVID relief. And let's be clear, the $2.2 trillion CARE stimulus package had all sorts of taxpayer relief for private corporations.
Right. And
yet it had zero real relief for the post office. The only thing they, quotes, gave the post office is not a gift at all. It's a albatross around our neck. They said you can borrow up to $10 billion more. Well, the post office doesn't need debt. It has no way to pay it back. The post office isn't set up to pack money in the bank to pay high-priced CEOs, to enrich shareholders. Post office is set up to serve the American people on a break-even basis, and we're all shareholders in that sense. So any more debt just gives this Treasury Department, this administration, more control, more strings, and so on. It was very. Go ahead, Richard. I'm sorry.
I was just going to remind our listeners that we're talking to Mark Dimondstein, who is president of the American Postal Workers Union. And I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name. Everybody mispronounces my name, including my elementary school teachers. And I think my name is phonetic, and you guys do phonetics. But so I apologize for that.
Yeah,
and I'm glad you brought up the bailouts of corporations, because I think it's important for people to note that. And I also want to talk about the fact that as you and I are recording this, we just this week learned who President Trump's nominee to head the Postal Service is. And I don't know if you want to say a few words about that or not, but if you do, go ahead.
Well, it's interesting you said his nominee, because theoretically, it's the Postal Board of Governors nominee. This is not, it used to be a cabinet position in the old post office department. Since 1970, there's supposed to be an independent board of governors. They choose the new PMG. But actually what you said is probably accurate. The new PMG, his name is Louis DeJoy. He's going to take over on June 15th. He's a mega donor of the Trump administration. He has some connection with the post office through enriching himself through subcontracting. But he was probably picked by this either president himself or Secretary Treasurer Mnuchin. Now, look, we will have time will tell, but it's certainly not. It's certainly a troubling sign that, number one, cronyism and patronage, which was taken out of the post office in the reorganization 1970, seems to be alive and well. And secondly, the post office is now being run by a board of governors that has no postal knowledge and experience. There's nothing. They're outside financial people. Now, someone that ran a logistics company that did some business with the post office, but there's no real postal knowledge, both in terms of operation and in terms of how the post office fits into our country, our society, our history, our culture, and our way of life. So that is troubling. And we basically said, look, this new PMG, however it happened, has a choice. He could be a postmaster to implement the policies of this administration, which are to raise prices on the people of the country, make e-commerce much more expensive for everybody, including small business people and including some large companies, which then the people would pay for, to reduce service, even challenge the universal service mandate that, again, dictates that we go to everybody's home, no matter who we are and where we live. There's no surcharges with the post office now based on distance and so on and so forth. And those kind of things may be challenged. And of course, they are challenging the workers' rights to collective bargaining, which is what's really led to a better quality of life for postal workers, our families, and our communities. Because when we have good paying living wage job, that helps everybody. Here we got close to 30 million suddenly unemployed workers all over the country. And this administration will put at risk 600,000 plus living wage, mostly union jobs. So the postmaster can go that way. And if the postmaster chooses to go that way, he's going to have a fight on his hands, because the post office is extremely popular amongst Democrats, Republicans. The last Pew Institute poll, and Pew does a poll every year on how people rate government agencies. Post office is always the highest. This year was the highest ever, and I think that's partly a deep appreciation for what postal workers are doing during this pandemic, getting medicines into people's home, medical info, checks, contact with the outside world where so many people are shuttered at home. It was 91% favorable in relation to the public post office, but maybe more important than that, it was equal amongst those who identified as Republicans and those who identified as Democrats. So if this Postmaster General goes to carry out and plans to carry out the plans of this administration, the people of this country, I don't think are going to buy it. Or the postmaster, the new Postmaster General, he's not in yet, he's been appointed, made some favorable comments. Those are words. He follows his own words, and he believes in a public post office and serving the people of this country and enhancing the wonderful mission of binding the country together. Then we'll welcome the opportunity to help the post office be the most vibrant that it can be. So time will tell. There's some troubling signs on the horizon, and the people of this country will have to be vigilant to make sure that what belongs to them is not stolen from them.
Which means we all have to communicate that message and make sure it's not just words, but good words that we hear, but good actions as well. So I know you're busy, Mark Dimondstein. I'm going to give you one last question for you. Right now, your workers, your union members and everybody working very hard through this pandemic, a time of risk, a time of illness. They're on the front lines. And at the same time, they're hearing negative talk from the White House or wherever about their institution. And even though they try to exclude the workers from it, by inference, their work. How is worker morale these days?
Well, I think under the circumstances, it's remarkably good. Postal workers are a very proud group. We're very proud of our mission, and even in this pandemic, the postal workers of all crafts have been out there. A lot of the people that we represent, the window clerks who go by, stand for and bring packages to, and so on, are out there in the front lines. A lot of the people that we represent are behind the scenes. They're kind of invisible. But someone sorts that letter that gets dropped in a mailbox in Washington, D.C. and ends up in somebody's address in Los Angeles. People see their letter carriers more. They're represented by the NALC. They're out there in the front lines. What people do not accept, and it lowers morale, is when the President of the United States says the post office is a joke. We've lost 54 postal workers by last count, tragically, to this terrible virus. We've had thousands of people test positive or presumptive positive. We've had over 10,000 people quarantined. We've had people that have not been able to come to work because out of protection for family members who might be compromised. And so to be told that this is a joke is the insult of insults. And certainly the customers who are receiving vital goods and packages and medicines, census information, election information, and so on, know that the Postal Service is no joke. So we just one last thing, Richard, on my end. So what happened in Congress was this. In the CARES Act, the $2.2 trillion, the House of Representatives actually had some sizable relief. And actually the Senate did as well. So that indicates some of the bipartisan support for the Postal Service. And even with that bipartisan support on the House side and the Senate side, this administration said, you're not going to get anything, and there's not going to be a stimulus package if the post office gets genuine relief. Not more debt, not more loans, genuine relief. Nobody was willing to flip the script. We have many good friends in Congress on both sides of the aisle. We need to make sure that this time around, that relief is there, and we're relying on your listeners and the people around the country. Please call, write, email your congresspeople, share with them how important this is, and that the post office needs genuine relief in the next stimulus package. You can go to apwu.org. They can help connect you with your congresspeople. There are petitions that are signed. There's over 1 million people that have signed those petitions. We're going to collect them soon, and we will find a creative way, even in this world of remote, shuttered at home living, to deliver those petitions to this Senate, House, and government. Let the will of the people be heard loud and clear. So anything your listeners can do to help, we greatly do appreciate. And we know your listeners do appreciate the postal workers. And by the way, I also want to say this. We're not the only workers on the front line, and we honor everybody out there, whether they're transit workers, grocery store workers, meat packers, truck drivers, and of course our wonderful healthcare personnel who are out there. And I think it underscores once again who makes the world go round in normal times and in times of crisis, where it becomes much clearer. But we know there's a great appreciation for postal workers, and we're asking that the best way to show that appreciation is to make sure Congress does the right thing, carrying out the will of the people, protecting the public commons and the public good, and making sure that this wonderful national treasure goes back to a year before the founding of the country itself, carries forward into the future. And again, whether it's times of normal times or times of crisis, where the post office is always there for the people of the country, just like it always has been. And we can't let it run out of money because it is crisis. And we can't let those sitting in the White House or the Heritage Foundation types that want to privatize, steal from the public, raid that public till. We can't let them use this crisis to accomplish those shameful aims. So I'm confident with the great support we have and the way that the country, the people of the country feel, that whatever Wall Street money they have behind them, when we get the people together, the people can always prevail. So I'm confident that we're going to win this fight and move forward together.
Well, we will stay on it and do whatever we can from our little corner of the world, and we will keep encouraging people to contact their senators and representatives about it. So Mark Dimondstein, president of the American Postal Workers Union, we appreciate you, we appreciate your workers, and we appreciate you coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard, and keep up the good work out there. And again, I hope your listeners are staying as healthy and safe as possible in these troubling times. But the people are strong, despite the fact that this, in my view anyway, and I think probably yours, it's a crisis that was made far worse by not having enough of societal and collective response to our healthcare, to our sick leave, and to the ability to deliver on a national basis when we're in times of crisis. So it's been tragic, but there's some positive lessons that can always be drawn out of crisis, and one of which is the common good and the need for it, whether it's the post office, whether it's Medicare for all, whether it's sick leave for all. And I think coming out of this, we can have a reevaluation and reassessment about what kind of country we want to live in as the 99%. Was it going to belong to us, the 99%, or is it just going to serve the 1%? So I'm also optimistic, despite the terrible crisis, that we're going to come out stronger and better if the people stay determined and united.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So again, Mark Dimondstein, and I never say that, by the way. So again, Mark Dimondstein, president of the American Postal Workers Union, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you, Richard. Take care.